Hello, bros. We're back with Heinz Evis's Vampire. Or is it The Vampire? No, it's just Vampire. We're on chapter 6. This is the second part of the chapter because I did not want to read 54 pages at once. We will read the second 22 pages. Maybe it was 40 some pages. Anyway, there was a knock on the door, and the Yaqui soldier came in with the leather bag. The pistols were at the bottom. On top, Frank Braun found a heavy black leather case with silver corners. What was in that? He opened it and remembered silver toilet articles, a present some gentleman in Cleveland had given him after a lecture there. So his secretary had packed the damn thing. How lucky. He could not possibly have found a better present for the general. Leaving the revolvers in the bag, he took the case and also stuffed his pockets with the silly 5 and 10 store articles. When he got back to the patio, the peddler had already closed his deal with the general and squatted in a corner, straightening out his wares. The dictator played with the gold trinkets, looking grandly at his fat fingers, on which he now wore 3 heavy rings set with imitation diamonds. Frank Braun walked over to him, shook hands, wished him a happy name day, and gave him his present. Bila did not thank him. He was much too curious to find out what was in the case. He opened it cautiously and took out all the shiny things, one by one. There were 3 razors with Solengren steel blades and ivory handles, soap cups and brushes. Everything could be taken apart and put together again. That pleased the general very much, but the main attractions were the small manicure instruments, little files and knives, scissors, small sticks, powder boxes, tiny spoons, an endless store of wonders. The officers crowded close, staring. Don Benjamino bent down to the general. La Goyita is here, general. Let her come in, Pancho Villa cried. Then he turned to Frank Braun and offered him a cigarette. Thank you, Caballero, thank you. Bring us wine. I want to drink with him. He offered the full glass to Frank Braun. Drink, Alman, drink. If you want women, pick one out yourself. If you want a horse, say so, and Don Benjamino will give you the best horse we have. He beckoned to a soldier to bring him a basket and some brown paper. He packed the case away carefully, but hesitated whether to send it to his room. Finally, he ordered the Indian to squat down beside him with the case between his legs. Perhaps he would feel like looking at it again. A space was cleared in the center of the patio, and the marble floor was swept clean. The men crowded into the space between the pillars, some of the officers sitting on the few available chairs while the rest lay or squatted on the floor. The women had to stand in the rear against the walls. A hurdy-gurdy man pushed his instrument into the patio and immediately started to play. La Goyita followed close on his heels. She stepped into the center of the patio without bowing to her audience, without greeting anyone. She wore a Spanish costume. Her hair was coiled high with a shell comb to hold her black lace mantilla that fell down over her shoulders. Over her left ear she wore a bunch of red hibiscus blossoms and another one between her breasts. She had great, beautiful eyes of deep blue. Well, how do you like her? Pearlstein asked. Frank Braun looked at her. He knew her. Why, certainly. Where had he seen her before? Then he remembered. Wasn't she? Why, yes, of course. She was the dancer who had nursed little Louison on the Thuringia. Now he knew also where Pancho Villa had got the tiger from the fever ship. He caught her eye. She recognized him at once, but did not answer his nod. Neither he nor anyone else existed for her. She waited for the hand organ to give her the rhythm, and then she began. Playing with her little fan, she danced a madrigina, dignified, stately, a little stiff and tedious, It seemed ridiculous. A Madrelina here, of all places. But this was just what the audience liked. They showered her with applause. Then she took up her castanets and danced, a rich paternera, but again very tame, graceful, and delicate, just like the well-bred senoritas in Toledo and Saragossa. Now she took off her mantilla and pulled out the comb, putting both on the chair beside her accompanist, the organ grinder. Frank Braun saw that all her implements were lying on the chair, shawls, shoes, and a riding crop with them. La Pagonia, he thought. She put on a gray felt hat with a stiff brim, a pert Cordoba hat such as the men wore or wear in Andalusia, and she took a large manton? How do you say it? A long fringed silk shawl in green and yellow, and with large red flowers on it. Then she returned to the center of the floor. She was dancing a tango now, but not a wild, lascivious tango of the kind harlots dance before their clay huts in the suburbs of Buenos Aires, not a gypsy tango as the Andalusian wenches dance in their quadros, swinging their buttocks and lifting up their long trains. No, it was a very mild dance, ad usum Delphini. She threw her hat on the floor. That's not very nice, buddy. It is a pretty bad book, but I'm still going to finish the motherfucker. She threw her hat on the floor, took up a white manton, and danced the seguidilla, and then the Solieris, and finally she danced the Malaguena with a beautiful shawl of darkest purple. Family dancing, Frank Braun thought, that was exactly how young ladies danced in Grenada, in Jaen, and Sevilla. This fucking book cost me $200. I was expecting much better, but the two books before it were much better. And they cost far less. But the officers liked it, crowded around her, and offered her their glasses. She shook her head and did not touch their champagne. The rumba, Pancho Villa cried. Dance the rumba. The officers echoed. No, La Goita said, not a single word more. She took off her high-heeled shoes and put on alpargatas, peasant shoes of canvas made with hemp soles. This time she did not put on a mantilla, nor a comb or veil, and she did not use her castanets. And thus she danced the first Aragonesian jota. Oh yes, now there was life in it. Now she showed her slim legs in this fast peasant dance. The officers could not get enough. They wanted more and more, and after every dance they demanded the rumba. But the woman remained firm. She put on her high-heeled shoes and danced the faruca, lithesome like a gypsy, swinging her hips, twisting her stomach. Ah, now it was no longer society dancing. Then she danced the garrotin, stamping and drumming the beat with her feet, imitating alternately the bullfighter and the inviting, provoking gestures of the wench as she lifts and drops her skirts. The rumba! The officer shouted, excited and provoked by this dancing. The rumba! Now, putting on a skirt with a long train, she danced the flamenco of the Gaditanian harlots and the fast, sensuous tapatio and what the fuck does this say? Poor Alegrias. She also danced the vulgar Mariana, swinging her hips, throwing her buttocks, twisting and rolling her stomach, while the motions of her hands invited with shameless gestures. Villa called to her, dance it for me, dance the rumba. He could not bear to see all the officers standing around her while he sat apart by himself. He struggled with himself to overcome his impulse to jump up and join them, because still he had to prove that he was different. He did not care about the officers, but he wanted to impress the dancer. Dance the rumba for me, he cried, for me alone. Abruptly, La Goita leaped to her feet and walked over to the general. She drew one more puff from her cigarette and threw it away. Holding her manton with both hands, she thrust up her head. No, not for you, and not for anyone else. You are drunk tonight, all of you. She turned sharply on her heels and walked away like a princess, and nobody dared to hold her back. Pancho Villa was fuming with rage. Still he laughed, because he alone, at least, had stood back and had not thrown himself at her like the others. You are like a bunch of dogs, he shouted, running after a bitch in heat. They all laughed heartily at the joke, and only one man answered him, the limping, hunchbacked General Alvaro Gamuzio. That's only half the truth, Pancho Villa, he cried. La Goyita isn't in heat. Again they roared with laughter, filled their glasses, and rinsed their hoarse throats with champagne. An officer stepped into the patio, walked up to Villa, and saluted. Gonzales is outside, he reported. He brought the prisoners from Bonanza. Bring them in, the general commanded. Don Beniamino muttered beneath his breath, poor devils, I wouldn't like to be in their skins. A detachment of officers and soldiers marched in, pushed the prisoners before them, covered with grime from head to foot. There were 9 prisoners, 6 men and 3 women. Priests and nuns, the colonel whispered to Frank Braun. Look, the rags of these women were nuns' habits once. And the men, do you see their tonsors? Now watch, now we will be playing French Revolution. What do you mean? The German asked. In our book, Pearlstein continued, in the book about the Great Revolution, which the general must have had read to him at least a dozen times, it says that the Jacobins hated priests. It also says in the book that they burned convents and raped nuns, and that they strung up every male priest on lampposts. We have no lampposts, but we can string them up just as well as the French did. He told Frank Braun that several days ago the general had given orders to pillage the convent of the Sisters of the Good Shepherd at Bonanza. There had been a rumor that a few priests had escaped and were being hidden by the nuns at this convent. I can see the priest, Frank Braun said, but where are the nuns? Colonel Pearlstein laughed. Oh, it was just a small convent. There couldn't have been more than a dozen sisters there. How many are here? 3? Then the other 9 are soldiers' wenches today. We don't waste time. You see, every troop has orders to seize and bring to headquarters everyone who doesn't put up armed resistance or try to escape. But it is very strange, the nuns who are not too dilapidated, who are still tolerably appetizing, always do. And all we get here are the old fossils. Isn't the general jealous? Frank Braun asked. Isn't he furious that his boys bring him only the tough meat and eat the tender morsels themselves? Oh no, decidedly not. He knows that the nuns would have passed through 20 hands anyway before he would get them. There would be little difference then between them and our own strumpets. And you see, there is something peculiar about these nuns. Formerly, the general himself pillaged many a convent, and he knows what to expect. He lost his fancy for that kind of stuff long ago. They are no good in bed. I believe he would exchange all the nuns in the world for one kiss from La Goyita. Gonzales made his report. He had brought the priests, he said, but the 7th, an old man about 80 years old, had broken down on the road half dead, so they had left him there. 4 of the nuns had put up armed resistance. 5 had tried to escape. They had to be shot down. I hope you hit them in the bullseye, Villa roared, and his officers howled with laughter at this marvelous joke. Then he bellowed at the priests, You are spies, you swine. You're spies of General Carranza. One of the men tried to speak, but only a few broken words came painfully from his trembling lips. Pancho Villa cut him short. Fusila a esos carajos. He waved his hand, took up his glass, and had it filled. Then he shouted at the nuns, Can you dance the rumba? The old sister stared at him. What was it he was asking? But he hardly looked at them and hissed contemptuously, "Take them away." So this is the way they conduct a court-martial here, Frank Braun thought. Put the swine before a firing squad. That's all. And out they go. The Jacobins couldn't have done it more expertly. Why bother with a hearing with judges and witnesses and lawyers? They have tonsors. They are priests. Kill them. He walked over to Colonel Pearlstein. "Keep them here for a minute, will you, please?" he asked. "What do you want?" the colonel queried. Frank Braun repeated, "Just a minute, please." He looked over at the general for an instant. Villa seemed ugly, beyond description. He was covered with hair from his neck down, and he had long, hairy arms like an ape. His wild, blinking eyes seemed to mistrust even themselves. He had a bashed-in nose. Now he bared his teeth, grinding them, with a scraping noise like a tiger. The general tapped the soldier who squatted beside him and asked for the leather case. He opened it, and his clumsy hands played with the little mirrors and spoons. Frank Braun thought, "No, this is no tiger. It is a gorilla who plays at being a tiger." He walked over to Villa. "General," he said, "you promised me a horse. I have a good one, and I don't need another one just now. Will you grant me another favor?" "What do you want?" the dictator asked. "Release the priest for me." The general frowned, and Frank Braun quickly explained, "Not for nothing, General. I'll give you a revolver for each." He turned around and asked the aide to send for his bag. "And I'll give you 5 boxes of cartridges with each weapon, 250 rounds. "This is a very bad bargain for you," the general said. "They are not worth a single shot, all of them together." The bag was brought, and Frank Braun took out a box with trick matches that would not burn and gave it to the general. Then he found a cigar case with firecracker cigars and a few similar toys. Pancho Villa forgot everything else. He made Frank Braun explain the childish toys to him, while the officers were told to stand on the other side of the patio so they could not look on. Then he himself tried the toys one by one, called his officers over, and beckoned to the women. He showed them he showed them his treasures, slapping his knees gleefully when they were fooled. And again Frank Braun repeated his request. "Do I get the priests, General?" "Where are the weapons?" the dictator snapped. Frank Braun took them out of the bag, put them on the floor, and arranged the boxes with cartridges beside them. The general took up one of the revolvers, examined it with an expert's eye, and loaded it. "Call the Holy Fathers now," he ordered. He's going to shoot them, I know it. The priests and nuns were brought before the general, lined up in a row. "I have a good mind to try these revolvers on you," he laughed. He raised the gun, aimed for an instant at the head of the first priest, and suddenly lifted the barrel and shot into the air. The old nuns screamed, fell to their knees, and prayed aloud. The priests followed their example. "Shut up, swine," the general bellowed. "You aren't worth the powder. Get up, priest. This man here has bought your freedom. You are free." He turned to his aide. "Don Benjamino, see to it that nothing happens to them. Write them passports for their trip to the United States." But he had not yet had enough. He called one of the priests to him and gave him a cigar. The priest took it, turning it around in his trembling hands. "Smoke," the dictator commanded. The priest hastily lit the cigar and drew a few careful puffs. "Smoke harder," Pancho Villa cried. The old man had drawn 5 or 6 puffs before the firecracker went off with his sharp crack. Frightened, he dropped the cigar to the floor. Pancho Villa howled with laughter. "Go now, go, Blackcoat, and when you get to Spain, tell your brothers that is the kind of cigars they smoke at General Villa's." Colonel Pearlstein ordered them let out, but before they had crossed the threshold, the dictator jumped to his feet. "Not the nuns," he shouted. "Not them. He has bought the priest, I can't read anymore, a revolver for each, but he hasn't bought the old hags. They'll have to swing." Frank Braun cried, "I'll buy them too, General." "Have you any more revolvers?" Villa shouted, "and enough cartridges?" The bag was empty. He had brought only 6 guns, and all the trinkets were given away. There were only a few books left. "Here, my new leather bag," he cried. "No," the general cried. Give the bag to Captain Gonzalez, who will get your priests safely across to the Yankees. I want revolvers for the nuns, the same as for the priests, and if you haven't any more, they'll swing. Suddenly, Frank Braun noticed La Goyita standing near the general. She pushed aside the officers who stood in her way, drawing herself up to her full height before the dictator. I'll buy the nuns, she said. Pancho Villa yelled at her, if you give me the weight of these stuffed pigs in gold, you won't get them. Hello, bruvs. La Goyita quietly said, I'll dance the rumba. The general jumped to his feet. The rumba! The nuns are free. The nuns are free, Captain Gonzalez. You are to see that they get through safely and unharmed. The dancer walked over to the nuns, kissed them, and gave them some gold. Then she came back and stood beside the general. Please get me a glass of wine, General, she said. Pancho Villa ordered champagne brought for her, and she drained the glass in 3 quick draughts. Another, please. Frank Braun gave her his full glass. She thanked him with a brief glance and drank the wine. Clear the floor for me, she said. I'm going to dress. She took her shawls, shoes, castanets, and all her other things in her arms and went into one of the rooms that opened from the patio. The officers again cleared the place in the center and had it swept clean of bottles, dirt, and paper. Then they all filled their glasses to the brim and waited. An officer with a heavy mustache stood beside Frank Braun, looking at him as if he wanted something and did not dare to ask for it. What is it? The German asked. The Mexican pointed eagerly to the leather bag. May I have it? He asked. The general. Are you Captain Gonzalez? The officer nodded, and Frank Braun reached into the bag, took out the books, and walked over to the door with the Mexican officer. Promise me, he began. The captain cut him short. Don't worry. I'll give them all the food and drink they want tonight, and I'll get them to the border safely. You can depend on me. He proudly stroked the beautiful leather bag. Come with me, he called to the nuns and priests. Frank Braun spoke to them and gave them Villa money and American dollar bills. Then he remembered the books in his hands. Perhaps for the trip. He looked at them again. No, that wasn't reading matter for the trip. One of the books was Jacopane de Todi. I'm sure I butchered that name. Jacopane de Todi. I don't know how to say it. The other, a thin volume, contained the poems of St. Francis and his pupils. Who can read Latin? He asked. One of the men could, the priest who had had to smoke the cigar. Frank Braun gave him the verses of the Saint of Assisi. Are any of you Italian? No, they were all Spaniards, but the old Mother Superior had lived in Rome and could read both Latin and Italian, so he gave her the sweet songs of the man from Todi. Don't forget, Mother, he said. Don't forget, this is the saint who created the Mater Dolorosa and also the Mater Speciosa. The Virgin truly was a Dolorosa for you tonight. She brought you great sorrow, and yet she became the Speciosa. And remember also, Dolores is the name of the woman who bought you your freedom, Dolores Echevarria. Suddenly the hand organ blared forth, recalling Frank Braun to the patio. Travel with God, he cried. He hurried back to his chair beside Villa. The dancer had not yet come in, but the hand organ was playing the sensuous rhythm of the rumba. Congratulations, the colonel whispered to him. You did that very nicely. But let me tell you, half a year ago, Villa wouldn't have released the priests and the nuns. Not for your dressing case, not for your revolvers, nor for your firecracker cigars, or the other junk from the New York 5 and 10 store, not even for the rumba of the Goyita. He gave Frank Braun a full glass. Don't drink yet. Wait till she comes. The French Revolution is going out of fashion with us. That's the reason. The general is beginning to wonder at times if it is really necessary to kill everybody who wears a clerical habit. Did you hear him utter any juicy curse, any really bad swear word? Nothing, not a word. But only half a year ago he spat out curses with every sentence. All that has changed since we are reading The Prussian King. Unfortunately, I am not well educated, And I don't know whether everything is true that our Spanish book tells us about Frederick the Great, but according to the book, he was a thorough atheist, and that impressed Villa. For it says in the book that nevertheless he did not interfere with the followers of any religion, and that he let the people live as they liked. In the beginning, the general couldn't see that at all, but it seems that gradually he is beginning to understand it. You see, when we read a book, we read it over and over a dozen times at least. The general has to imitate somebody, and I believe the day is not far off when in his country, too, anybody will live as he pleases. He stopped at as the Goyita stepped into the patio. She wore a white muslin skirt reaching down to the calves of her legs, and a blouse of the same material, cut like a man's shirt, but unfastened in front. A blue silk shawl was wound tightly around her waist, and she wore a blue silk kerchief about her throat. Another blue kerchief was tied across her forehead, covering her hair with a knot in the back, from which the two loose ends hung down over the nape of her neck. Her costume was that of a peasant girl, as known to the vaudeville stage, of course. Waving a little basket in her hand, she made a few studied gestures, supposedly indicating that she was coming from work in the fields and that it was very hot. Why the heat should make her feel like dancing was not made very clear. She decided upon it without any plausible explanation. She threw her basket away, drew off the kerchief at her neck, and fanned herself with it, pretending to wipe off the perspiration. Then she threw it after the basket. The Goyita went through this little prologue without much enthusiasm and with rather stiff gestures, but the audience understood the meaning. It is very hot, and therefore she is lightly dressed, only in skirt and blouse, and she is going to dance. She stepped into the center of the floor, looked at her organ grinder, and waited for the beat. Not the best, the beat. Suddenly, the general waved his hand, and all the officers rose with him. Viva la Goita! They cried, draining their glasses and holding them high over their heads. Colonel Pearlstein walked over to her and handed her a full cup. She raised it to her lips and drained it to the last drop. Viva Villa! Then she returned the glass, glanced quickly around the patio, and stamped her foot angrily. Send the women away, General. He could understand that, of course, she wouldn't dance the rumba before them, nor before these harlots, so the women had to go. And then she began, slowly, step by step, languorously, stretching and weaving, but supple and lithesome in her movements. Gradually her movements became faster. Her body swayed and undulated. Ripples passed along her arms, down her whole body from her neck to the tips of her feet, as if snakes were twisting themselves quickly down her body. And in sharp contrast were the movements of her shoulders. Abrupt, fast, strangely angular, this was not a dance of the hips or of the stomach, not a dance in which she kicked her legs and waved her arms or made provoking gestures with her head and hands. Of course, all this was in it, too. She rolled out her stomach and drew it in, twisted her hips, lifted her arms and legs in the gestures of one suffering from the tiring heat and seeking coolness. But it was only to her shoulders that she drew the eyes of her audience, to her shoulders and to her breasts. She was dancing faster now, more wildly, whirling, her hands firmly planted on her hips. Her shoulders jerked, flew back and forth, shot out and bent back, one, the other, and again both. Then, only for a short instant, her unfastened blouse opened, showing a narrow strip of white skin down to her waist. Now, not only her shoulders were working, now it was her whole chest. The stretching became a quick jerking, the weaving and swaying a fast heaving. It seemed as if she were dancing with her lungs now, and throughout there was this rapid twitching, this jerking, more wildly, more madly, and now suddenly it jumped out of her shirt as at a quick backward twist of her left shoulder, one of her young breasts. There it was, peering out for an instant, whiter, more shining than her white shirt, and disappeared again quickly as it had come. Ah, the officers exclaimed. Ah, oh. She danced on, always this twisting and twitching of her shoulders, this heaving of her chest, and these undulations down her body, and this stretching that became a rapid twisting, this wild jerking that dissolved into a gentle, languorous swaying. The officer's eyes were glued on her every instant, waiting eagerly and hungrily for the fleeting moment when they would again spy one of her white breasts. The other one, they cried hoarsely, Sakula? Sakala. That was the game. It always looked as if one of her breasts would gleam out of the blouse that yet covered them again and again. Sakala! They shouted and yelled. As if by command, the right breast peeped out of the shirt. It smiled and sparkled, cool as marble, and hid itself quickly behind the thin cloth. Pancho Villa shot up from his chair, bending forward heavily so that he almost dropped to the floor. His protruding eyes nearly popped from their sockets, and the saliva dripped from his open mouth. Las dos, he shouted, both. His men shouted after him, Las dos, las dos. Their lecherous lust, the lust of bulls in heat, filled the wide space like dense fog. It crept into their noses and mouths, clawed at their bestial brains. These brutal warriors who had thousands of harlots at their elbows, waiting for a smile that would be a command. These robbers and bandits who stole half-grown children from their mothers and dragged nuns out of cells into their beds, for whom the flesh of woman was as cheap as their dirty pulque. These men trembled in reverent excitement at the sight of these two breasts. Their clumsy hot hands twitched after these snowy globes. Their dark eyes leered at this white quarry that peeped out and quickly hid itself. Their tongues hung out like those of bulls, panting for the sweet draught from those white buds. Their nostrils drank in the scent of cherry blossoms. Their ugly ears were strained for the dancing music of these white kittens that played hide and seek with them. One quick, quick, and another quick, quick. The lame General Alvaro Gumuzio embraced the pillar with both his arms, holding onto it with all his strength. As if he were afraid of fainting, Pancho Villa dug his knees into the shoulder of the soldier who squatted before him, weighing down upon him with the whole weight of his huge bulk, almost squashing him. Las dos, the dictator whispered. Las dos. Colonel Perstein still controlled his expression. There was a smile on his face, critical and slightly mocking, but it seemed frozen, and he gripped the handles of his riding crop, pressing it so that the white of his knuckles showed. And now Frank Braun, too, was drawn into the red fog. He felt as if he were breathing hot lava, as if he were choking in this ardor that clouded his senses. Distantly, far away, somewhere in the clouds, behind the endless, flaming desert, there lured white coolness. White, very white, somewhere in an immense distance. There was shade and snow, innocence and purity, and amidst marble and swans and clammy cold winding sheets, there was rest, release from this torrid torment. There was, somehow, in the clouds on which the moon was shining, hidden in the mystery of glowing whiteness, delivery from the torpor. There was the infinite well-being. Then he saw, flying past him like a falling star in a November night, a small red strip on her chest, beneath her breast, between her breasts, a tiny wound less than an inch long, and a single drop of blood oozed from it. Something whipped him into action. Something pulled him forward, but he forced it down, clasping the arm of his chair with both hands, holding on to it with all his strength. One, quick as a flash, and another, again, quick. Pancho Villa clasped his fingers together. Las dos, he prayed. Las dos. Suddenly, with a jerk, she stopped as the music broke off. Drawing herself up to her full height, her proud head far back, her dark blue eyes triumphantly on her slaves. For an instant she stood there, then she threw back her arms, and with a wild shudder pulled back her shoulders, and her young breasts came out, both together. No one laughed, no one said a word. Deep, breathless silence. Were they weeping? Were they down on their knees? All of them? La Goyita walked away and sat down on her chair beside the organ grinder, carelessly throwing a kerchief over her shoulders. No one applauded, no one dared move. The men seemed to be frozen to stone, transfixed to the spot where they had been sitting and standing, mesmerized, hypnotized for minutes after the dance was over. Frank Braun thought, she has learned from the animal trainer, and she has surpassed her master. She knows how to tame the beast and make it lick her hand. She got up, walked slowly across the patio, and sat down beside Pancho Villa. Give me a drink, please, she said quietly. I am thirsty. General, I am thirsty. Colonel Pearlstein filled the glass for her. This is your feast today, General. To your health. That roused Pancho Villa. He reached into the basket that the soldier was still holding between his knees and took out the black dressing case, which he handed her without a word. She opened it and smiled. What should I do with that? Shave myself? He was embarrassed like a schoolboy as he took back the dressing case. Then he proffered her the watches, bracelets, and earrings that he had brought from the peddler, that he had bought from the peddler, dropped them in her lap. He pulled the diamond rings from his fat fingers and added them to the pile. Colonel Pearlstein took pins and necklaces from his pockets and gave them to her, adding fat rolls of Villa money. All the officers came up one by one and filled her lap with jewelry and gold. The general again opened the pouch on his belt and took his hands out full of gold coins, which he dropped into her lap. He laughed, pleased at the pretty sound of tinkling gold. She called to the organ grinder to bring her bag, carelessly dropping the presents into it. Thank you, she said. She said it just once, and it had to do for all, but it seemed as if the officers had to be grateful to her for accepting their presents. They crowded around her, trying to show their best side, well behaved, like children at a family party. Can these be robbers? Frank Braun thought. Murderers and incendiaries. They are lambs. The beautiful shepherdess led them gently by the purple silk ribbon of her eyes. Drink, she smiled at them. Drink, be merry. This is the general's name day. Obediently they drank. Nobody thought of calling back the women. Oh no, the Goyita was here, who had danced the rumba for them. She sat among them and drank and smoked with them. She, La Goyita. Frank Braun clicked his glass against hers. Who is left from the circus? He asked. This one here, she answered, pointing at the organ grinder. He is the only one left. He was one of the stable boys. Now he is almost blind. Blind? Frank Braun asked. From the fever? I don't know, she said. He had to stay a long time in the hospital in San Francisco, and when he came out, he was that way. Now he travels around with me. She looked at him for a long while with her sapphire blue eyes. He felt as if he were bathing in cool blue water, as if she were cleansing him of the heat and dirt. You have helped my priest, she continued. You are good, just as the captain was, just as all the Germans were, on the terrible fever ship. What became of the animals? He interrupted her. The captain helped me to sell them in San Francisco, and the tents, the cages, and everything. I got a lot of money for them, much more than we thought. I used the money to have masses read for the soul of the directress and for Louisans and for all the others. I could not sell the tiger and the wolf because they were both sick, but I nursed them back to health. I was more successful with them than with poor little Louisan. She spoke calmly as if she were speaking of times long gone by. The tiger was nasty and ugly. He tried to claw me, and he was treacherous and mean. So I sold him to the general. I am glad the bull killed him, but the wolf is grateful. He is my faithful companion. She told him about the captain of the Thuringia, about the officers and the crew. She spoke about her performances in California and Texas, in Sonora and Chihuahua. And now she had finally come to General Villa. Everyone listened quietly. Frank Braun kept his eyes on her every instant, but it was not her blue eyes that arrested his glance. It was like an obsession. He stared at her neck, praying that the kerchief would move, because underneath there was the small wound with the drop of blood. Finally, she got to her feet. This is your day, General Villa. I will dance again for you. She called to her organ grinder, but he had fallen asleep on his chair. Let him sleep, she said. Don't wake him. Who will grind the organ for me? All the officers hurried across the patio, but tall Dominguez was the first to take hold of the crank. She took off her light blouse before all these men, perfectly calmly, so sure, so dominatingly sure was she of her power. Frank Braun looked sharply. Where was the tiny wound? Her neck and her bosom were white, sparkling white, nowhere the tiniest red mark. He must have been dreaming. She tied a yellow mantle around her body, hips, breast, and shoulders. Then she stepped into the center of the floor and danced a short, simple ole. She took the flowers from her hair, distributing them amongst the officers, giving the largest and most beautiful one to Pancho Villa. Then she said, I will dance one more, a Sevillana, and that will be the last, the one that they dance in Chipiona before their Madonna. She danced lightly and serenely, bowing and swaying, singing the naive, simple copla, Morena, Morena, Eris, bendita tu morenura, que me tienes en la cama, sin frio ni calentura. I'm sure I botched that immensely, but who is the Morena? The general asked. Morena, the brown one of whom you are singing. Who this is? Why, that is the Virgin, the brown Virgin of Chipiona. And again the officers raised their glasses and drank to La Goyita. General Villa cried, I don't want any more wine. Bring me mescal brandy. Frank Braun gripped the colonel's arm. Have you any mescal? He asked. I have been asking everybody in town for it, and I couldn't get even the tiniest button. Pearlstein laughed. We can't either. The general is crazy for mescal, just as everybody is down here. We have given strict orders that all the mescal found must be delivered to headquarters, but nobody finds any, and so we don't get it. What we call mescal brandy has nothing in common with mescal except the name, about 1 button to 100 quarts of strong alcohol. The dancer softly touched Frank Braun's arm. What is it you want? She asked. Mescal buttons, he answered. It is a small fruit of a cactus variety. The Indians call it peyote. She said, I will get them for you. He looked at her in astonishment. You? Where will you get them? I don't know, she answered, but I will find them. Then she left. She nodded lightly, greeting everyone with a smile, but without shaking hands. The organ grinder followed her, wheeling his instrument. Slowly, the women came back into the courtyard. First, a few stole back, then the others followed, and soon the patio was loud and noisy again. Then the dice were brought out, and the cards. There was shouting and singing. The saint had gone, and the quiet church turned once more into a brothel. Large bottles were brought, heavy round bottles, from which the men poured a pungent smelling liquid into the glasses, mixing it with wine. There were no corks in the bottles, but brown, dried up, shriveled things that looked like small roots. Colonel Perstein showed him one. What is that? Frank Braun could not guess. Dried fingers of Yankees, whom we shot at Naco. Is that the general's brilliant joke? No. Colonel Gumicio invented it. He insists that the brandy tastes better this way. He took Frank Braun's arm. Come, doctor, we had better go now. What will happen here won't be enjoyable. They rode slowly back to the city. What do you want with the mescal? The Jew asked. Frank Braun answered, It just came to my mind the other day. I haven't had any for a long time, not for 10 years or more, and I thought it might help when I get those attacks of dizziness. Colonel Pearlstein shrugged his shoulders. I don't believe in that stuff, but you are right. All the Indians swear by it. With his riding crop, he pointed to a few completely charred ruins. There used to be a big building here, he said, the American consulate. It was torn down, and not one stone was left in place. And the consul? He was lucky. Someone hid him, and helped him to escape the mob who would have beaten him to escape. The mob would have beaten him to death if he had been caught. So they had to vent their rage on the stones. I think the Yankees are standing an awful lot of abuse from us. Yes, everything, Frank Braun nodded. If you kill every American in Mexico, and the consuls first of all, President Wilson will not lift a finger. But why? The officer asked. Oh, Frank Braun said impatiently, you know that yourself, because the Mexicans are to kill each other without interference from outside, and furthermore, because England wants it. You see, Colonel, the President and the whole government and the whole wealthy ruling class in the United States are making a great deal of money by doing what London wants them to do. What you get in the way of weapons and ammunition is just enough to make you dangerous to one another. The Yankees don't make any money selling you these firearms. On the contrary, but he makes one bloody million after the other on the war supplies that he is sending over to Europe against Germany and Austria, and for Russia and the Allies. The war would have been over long ago if the Americans did not send war material to the Allies more every single day than you get in years. This is America's big business, and as long as this is flourishing, there must be peace with you because, Colonel, if America were forced to go to war against you, they themselves would need their weapons and their ammunition, in which case the shipments of munitions to Europe would be stopped instantly. But that would mean that Germany would win the war. No, the Americans will wait until you have exhausted your strength by fighting each other, and then they will finish you. They will call it pacifying the country and restoring order. But as long as the war is going on in Europe, you will be left alone. And you are perfectly free to burn down consulates and kill as many Americans as you like. The war that you need in order to unite the factions in your country, the outside war, only one thing can bring you that war. What is that? Pearlstein asked. Only one thing, Frank Braun repeated. If Mexican troops would march into Texas or California. Colonel Pearlstein did not answer. He became quiet and thoughtful, and they rode through the streets of the city without another word. When they arrived at the Fonda, Frank Braun dismounted and had his horse led into the stable. Then he held out his hand to Pearlstein. Good night. The colonel took Frank Braun's hand, clasping it heartily. He whistled softly to himself, stroking the neck of his horse with his riding crop. Then he said slowly, I am an American. I was born in New York. I would be with them now. I would be riding today behind the Star-Spangled Banner if they had accepted me. They did not want me. They kicked me out like a leper. He dealt his horse a quick blow, and the frightened animal curveted aside. He reined it in quickly, turned around, and rode off at a slow trot. Suddenly he stopped, and turning in the saddle, called back, oh, through the night, in a clear voice, I will get Pancho Villa across the frontier. This is one of the fucking seemingly most pointless books entitled Vampire, which has nothing to do with vampires. Although there was some blood drinking in the beginning, but it was kind of insinuated, so I don't know what's going on with this book. $200 I spent on it, and I was really looking forward to a vampire story, so who knows? Maybe it will appear at some point. Goodbye, bros.